Shabbat Shalom. This is Larry Mitchell with Friends of Israel. We're going to be talking about the significance of praying for rain during the Feast of Tabernacles and the fact that it is a time of thanksgiving. Before we get into the Feast of Tabernacles, let me tell you a couple of stories that happened to me when I was in Israel. The first is when we went over to Israel as a family. We went in June. We were there for almost a month. And to understand this story, you have to realize that my family calls me this person. He was a little Abner. He was a man who had a dark cloud over his head. And no matter where he was going, it was always raining. Well, that characterizes me whenever I go on holidays. There's a dark cloud over me and it always rains. My family in Saskatchewan actually almost forbid me to come to visit them during the harvest because it was going to rain. So when we were going to Israel, of course I packed a rain jacket because I knew it was going to rain when we were in Israel. Well, as my Israeli friends discovered I was carrying a rain jacket, they all laughed at me. And they said, it's not going to rain while you're here. It's a summer season, and it never rains during the summer. And you know, we were there for the whole month of June, and even though it always rains when I go on holiday, we didn't see a cloud. You see, it doesn't rain during the summer, so it's very important for the children of Israel to start praying for rain in the fall, and they start praying for rain during the Feast of Tabernacles. The second story is when we visited Qumran, and this is during the Feast of Tabernacles. It was actually the very first day of the Feast of Tabernacles. We got to Qumran, and there's a little museum on top of a little hill, and then in between is a fairly steep valley, deep valley. And on the other side of the valley is a little hill where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that little valley, at the entrance of that valley, they had a big sign, warning, do not go into the wadi or valley because of the danger of flooding. Well, I looked around. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. It was hot. It was dry. And I thought it was kind of funny to have this sign warning people not to go into the valley because of the danger of flash floods. So I actually took a picture of it. A couple of hours later, we were swimming in the Dead Sea. Not a cloud in the sky. It was hot. It was dry. And all of a sudden, a guard up on top of the hill began to yell and scream, "Get out now!" And I'm wondering, have we got a terrorist attack? Is the guy gone crazy? And all of a sudden, we begin to hear the roaring of a water as a flash flood came down to the Dead Sea. And just entered the Dead Sea just maybe 100 meters from where we had been swimming. That tells us that, and I looked around, there wasn't a cloud in the sky, but see, it was raining in Jerusalem the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles. And because when it rains in Jerusalem, and there is nothing to stop the waters, by the time the waters start flowing down the hills from Jerusalem into the Dead Sea, and they begin to have flash floods. You know, in Matthew chapter 24, we have Jesus speaking about his return. In Matthew chapter 24, verse 20, he says, "But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day." See, the Jewish people when the abomination of desolation occurs, are told to flee to the mountains of Jordan. But between the mountains of Jordan and Jerusalem is the Jordan Valley. And if they're fleeing in the wintertime, there's going to be flash floods. And so Jesus is saying, pray that your flight be not in the winter. So, the Feast of Tabernacles is a time of prayer. Let me just read from an article called I've Seen the Fire and I've Seen Sukkot, Shemini Aretz and the Rain. And this was in the cjnnews.com. Amon Bazak points out in Sukkot and the attributes of justice, the rain is often seen in the Torah as a blessing and its absence as a curse. If the people of Israel turn away to serve other gods, the anger of God will burn against you, and he will shut up the heavens, and you will have no rain. Deuteronomy 11:17. But if the nations listen to God's commandments, then I shall give the rain of your land in this time, in the early rain and the late rain, Deuteronomy 11:14. So there we have the rain coming in the spring and the rain coming in the fall. And this is why the Jewish people will pray for rain during the Feast of Tabernacles. Now there is a prophecy concerning the millennial kingdom, the Messianic age, that warns the Gentiles that they need to come up to the Feast of Tabernacles. And remember, in the previous lesson we showed that there were 70 bulls sacrificed for each of the 70 Gentile nations. In Zechariah 14, verses 16 to 17, it says, and it shall come to pass that everyone is left of all the nations which came up against Jerusalem, and shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whosoever will not come up of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. So the Feast of Tabernacles was a time of prayer for the children of Israel. It was also a time of thanksgiving. In Leviticus chapter 23, verse 39, it says, also on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered the fruit of the land, you shall keep the feast unto the Lord 7 days. So if you're lucky enough to go into a tabernacle, a booth, with a Jewish friend or at a synagogue during the Feast of Tabernacles, you'll find that they've built a structure and decorated with all sorts of fruits and vegetables, a display of thanksgiving. And if the first time you go there, you'll be thinking to yourself, this reminds me of the Christians' Thanksgiving holiday. And you know, some people will even go so far as to say, I think the Jewish people stole the Thanksgiving idea from our holiday. But it's actually the other way around. This is from an article from the Temple Institute. Families build booths of palm branches, partly open to the sky, to recall God's providence towards Israel during the 40 years of wandering in the desert and living in tents. The festival also celebrates the harvest, coming as it does at summer's end, so it is a time of thanksgiving. The Puritans, who took the Old Testament more seriously than most Christians, modeled the American holiday of Thanksgiving after Sukkot, or after the Feast of Tabernacles. So this year, when you celebrate Thanksgiving, the celebration of the Christian celebration of Thanksgiving is rooted into the Jewish holiday of Sukkot. This is Larry Mitchell, Friends of Israel. Shabbat Shalom.